So hello, good morning or good afternoon if you are connecting like from from another country. This is a webinar on enhancing the impact of the European Hydrogen Bank auctions, and we have today like this webinar is going to be a part of the event that we have in Italy on H2, and we have today we are today in here with Fabio and José Manuel. Please, Fabio, present yourself, please.
Hi, Lucia. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Fabio Passaro. I'm Senior Transition Policy Analyst with the Climate Bonds Initiative, which is an NGO aimed at mobilizing climate capital for climate finance. Thank you.
Hello, so that's great. And José Manuel, please, if you can introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm José Manuel Pérez. I am the Director of Regulation and Government Affairs of the Hydrogen Business Unit at EDP Renewables. EDP is a vertically integrated utility, but with its main focus on renewable energy, and hydrogen is the new sector that we want to enter to pursue our efforts in decarbonization and electrification of the economy. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here.
You're welcome. This is great. Just for the new ones that connect, just for you to know, if you are, we are recording this session, and we will send you the materials afterwards. So don't be shy and tell us where are you connecting from in the chat. I'm connecting right now from Madrid, Spain. So we would like to know where you are connecting from, and also please use the chat. Use the Q&A box to send your questions throughout the webinar. We will be happy to solve them at the end of the session with these great speakers. So we're gonna start with Fabio. So please, if you can share your screen for a moment and just start your presentation, that would be great. Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah, we see your presentation.
Thank you very much, Lucia. As I was saying, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And today, well, as I was saying, my name is Fabio Passaro, and I work for Climate Bonds as a Senior Transition Policy Analyst. I will start with first a brief agenda of what I'm trying to tackle here with the presentation. First of all, a couple of words on Climate Bonds Initiative, the NGO, which I work for and represent here. Then we'll get into one of our main work streams at the organization, which is developing standards and specific sector criteria to mobilize capital and investment for sustainable economy. And of course, to the topic of today, we'll tackle the sector-specific hydrogen criteria that we've developed and recently launched. And then we'll get a bit into the details of this criteria. The criteria encompass both mitigation, adaptation, and also resilience components. I will get into the mitigation part, which is probably the most significant here, and one of the most important angles that we tackle and that we include in the criteria is the additionality principle, which is also enshrined in the EU legislation and not only, also the US and other regulations. So to explain why that is important to us and why we are glad that it's been included in the legislation as well. And then closing with some of the hydrogen applications that we've seen as probably the most important to decarbonize, especially for those sectors that are so-called hard to abate sectors. So those that are difficult to abate the emissions and to reduce the emissions, and to make sure that they are on a pathway to net zero. And in many of these, like cement, like steel, fertilizers, to some extent cement, perhaps in the next decades, there is the importance of hydrogen that needs to be highlighted, how, especially if it's low carbon, and we'll get into how with the importance of definition and standards for the work that we're doing, and how this low carbon hydrogen can be instrumental in reducing the emissions in this sector that have very limited options to actually decarbonize. So a couple of words on the Climate Bonds Initiative. It's an international NGO aimed at mobilizing capital for climate action. We have different work streams. I'm personally here on the top one, top left, policy analysis and advocacy. I'm part of the policy team. What we do is we develop policy recommendations, and we have a policy advisory function to governments, regulators, but also central banks and cities as well. So not just countries, but also subnational level. We also have other work streams, starting with market development. We do an analysis of bonds, and what is the aim here is to catalyze green finance, and we engage with the stakeholders, and not just from the market development, but also from the investors' point of view. So we also engage with all the investors and thought leaders to make sure that capital goes into a low carbon economy and to transitioning to a net zero pathway. We also do market intelligence research, capacity buildings, and standards and taxonomies. We develop standards and taxonomies, which is what I'm going to tackle today. So we have developed the first taxonomies, which is the climate bonds taxonomies, and as part of this, we have an overarching standards that then is expanded with sector-specific criteria. One of these is exactly on hydrogen, which is the one that I'm going to tackle today. Now let's get into the specifics of the criteria. First of all, what can be certified under the criteria of climate bonds? One is the use of proceeds bond. So first, before getting into it, just a little caveat, a little differentiation for those who might not be aware of. So difference between use of proceeds bonds and sustainability-linked instruments. So one thing is the use of proceeds bond, which can be green bonds or transition bonds, are specific and earmarked to an activity or an asset. So the capital that is raised is specifically used for an activity or an asset. And it's not a general purpose financing like the sustainability linked instruments, which can be either sustainability linked loans or sustainability linked bonds. And in that case, we first start with the use of proceeds bond financing, as we can see at the top of the slide, for decarbonization measures, so retrofits, but also for assets like external facilities or projects. On the other hand, as we have expanded our standards with the version 4.0, we now also allow the certification, and we also tackle in this sector-specific criteria, including hydrogen, the possibility of certifying and aligning with our criteria for general purpose finance, like sustainability link bonds or loans, general instruments in a way. And that is, I think, a crucial thing, because it also allows for certifying all entities and all production facilities, as we can see. So it's not just for a specific component of a company, but the whole company can now be certified and comply with our sector criteria, which means that it is actually on a pathway to net zero and aligned with 1.5 Paris Agreement objectives. Now, what is actually included in the criteria? What parts of the hydrogen? Production or transportation, storage, end use application, what can actually be certified? Basically, almost the whole thing we've tackled in these sector-specific criteria. As we can see, it goes from the hydrogen production and with the electricity generation over as a feedstock, and then it goes on down the value chain to the transportation, distribution as storage as well. So it's the only part that we can see here that is not tackled is the specific end use as a heat for industry and buildings or as a fuel for transport. And as we see here for the conversion or reconversion and transportation and distribution at the bottom of the slide, some of these are included in our sector criteria for other sectors. So it's still under the standards and for sector-specific criteria, but not necessarily sitting under the hydrogen criteria. So this to say that climate bonds has a whole of economy approach, and other than the hydrogen criteria, we recently developed criteria for steel, for cement, for basic chemicals, but we also have other parts of the economies like buildings and electricity production, generation, say from solar, wind, bioenergy, and many more, because of course, we believe that the transition is important for the whole of the economy. All sectors of the economy need to transition, and as part of this, we have all these sector criteria. So it's not, of course, just on hydrogen, but it's complementary with all the others that we have included and that are part of the standards of the climate bonds standards. Now, specifically going to the mitigation criteria, as I was saying, which is the bulk of the criteria and the most important components probably. What is included and what I'm going to tackle, other than the adaptation and resilience criteria that I was saying, are also part of this hydrogen section and the hydrogen sector. The mitigation criteria, the most important here is that, as I was saying, what is possible to certify is projects and decarbonization measures within production facilities and production facilities as a whole, other than delivery projects as well. But what I also wanted to highlight here with this slide is that, other than, as I was saying before, just to reiterate, it's not just user proceeds bonds, so green or transition bonds, but it's also entities and all SLD, sustainability linked debt instruments, so bonds or loans, which then can be used actually to certify the whole company, which then gives the investors the insurance that the whole company is transitioning and is on a pathway to net zero, which is actually aimed at targeting one of the main barriers that we have seen in our analysis, as to make sure that the hydrogen economy can scale up, because in all these hard to abate sectors that I was mentioning, including hydrogen, starting with steel, fertilizers, as I was saying, and the others, one of the main barriers that we've seen to scaling up the investments and to make sure that there is enough to transition to a net zero, which is one of the aims, of course, of the European Hydrogen Bank, is to make sure that the capital is not just coming from the public sector, but the private sector. The private capital is actually going where it's needed the most, and and the aim of the criteria is actually to mobilize capital and to make sure that green is what it looks like. So as I was saying, one of the main barriers that we had seen and that they identified was actually on the lack of clarity. So the importance of standards, the importance of definitions, especially when it comes to hydrogen. As we know, we have different colors. Everyone can have different definitions. There are hundreds of organizations and different regulations at the policy level. So it's very crowded space, and having specific definitions, specific standards to know what we're talking about is actually very important, and is what we've seen that the investors were lacking. So confidence that the targets that companies are setting and where they're going to use hydrogen, so getting into the details of it, is actually very important, and is what we've seen that the investors were lacking. So now, with the emergence of different criteria, of course, not just those developed by climate bonds, but we hope that there will be more clarity in the market, so that investors are more confident in actually raising capital and investing in the companies that are transitioning to net zero and that will be sustainable in the long run and in the future decades to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement. Now, going a bit more into the specifics of the mitigation component of the criteria. As I was saying, we have production equipment, decarbonization measures, and whole projects within facilities that produce hydrogen that are covered by the sector criteria. And as I was saying, as we were seeing in the slides before, it encompasses both using hydrogen as a feedstock, but also, of course, the electrolytic production with electrolyzers using renewable energy. And these includes diverse activities. It can be reached with carbon capture. It can be reached with carbon capture storage and utilization. We have specific targets and specific provisions for that, and of course the electrification as well. So the mitigation component is quite encompassing, and this part that is covered by the criteria is all covered by the sector. So all companies producing hydrogen can be certified within the sector, as long as they meet our targets that we will see here. So what are the emission intensity thresholds towards net zero that need to be met in order to qualify and to comply with climate bonds criteria? As you see here right now, from 2023 on, when the criteria were launched, it's 3 kilograms of CO2 equivalent emitted per kilogram of hydrogen. And then we have declining criteria in the next couple of decades to 1.5 in 2030, at 0.7 in 2040, and then near zero by 2050. What's important is that climate bond criteria are global, so there is no differentiation within regions and no different targets that can be met by different countries. We have one set of criteria that is global. So as I was saying before, to make sure that there is clarity, that there is consistency, and that all over the world, especially in a commodity like hydrogen, there is the same level of ambition, and we can meet the targets that we have set ourselves to be on a net zero pathway and meet the Paris Agreement objectives. Now, what is important is, as I was saying, the facilities using fossil fuels and fossil resources will need to be below these carbon intensity thresholds to be net zero by 2050. What is interesting is that if you want to certify the whole company, then you will not need to actually meet the 2023 criteria right now, but you can be on a pathway to 2030 and commit to meeting the 2030 criteria, 1.5 kilograms of CO2 equivalent emitted per kilogram of hydrogen. And that will still make sure that you can qualify as transitioning on the transition pathway to net zero and to meeting the targets by 2030, which is I think something that recognizes the difficulty and the transitioning and the ambition that some companies can still have, although they are not green right now. But that's exactly why these instruments are here, to make sure that those who are committing and who have set targets for the future can actually still raise capital and be on Paris aligned trajectory. Now, depending on the production process, of course, there are other mechanisms that needs and maximum measures requirements that need to be implemented. And specifically when we go about biogas and fossil gas, methane monitoring verification mechanisms are crucial to make sure that for the whole value chain, we take into account the emissions that are emitted even upstream, that might not be actually happening at the facility level. Now, one of the key principles, as I was saying at the beginning, that we have included in the criteria that we are pleased to see have been included, although with some caveats, and we can get into these details for the EU legislation, but also in other legislations, in other jurisdictions, like in the US, is the additionality principle. Now, why that is important? That is important because we need to make sure that hydrogen production does not cannibalize the transition in the electricity sector. Now, why is that? Because what we think is that the additionality principle is crucial because it aims at showing that hydrogen capacity, especially when we talk about low carbon and renewable hydrogen, in particular green hydrogen, is actually not cannibalizing the energy transition and the electricity transition. So all the progress that has already been made in decarbonizing the electricity grid is maintained, and there is new electricity capacity and new power capacity that is coming up additionally, and that is linked to the hydrogen project. Now, how can this additionality principle be demonstrated under our criteria? It can be either through a PPA, power purchase agreement, that demonstrates the specific link between the electrolyzers with extra renewable capacity, with the new renewable capacity, or the renewable capacity that is used, the renewable electricity that is used, is some that would have been otherwise curtailed, so that would have been basically wasted. So that is hydrogen production is quite flexible. And then there's also a couple of circumstances under which the additionality principle does not need to be proven. Of course, if it's the electrolysis is solving grid imbalances, if basically it's electricity that would have been otherwise not used or wasted. So that's quite an important principle with us, and this has been included in the European legislation, although with some caveats. I'm starting in some cases 2028 or even 2038. So a bit late, but still we're happy to see progress and seeing that this principle has also been adopted in the EU legislation. Now, for the specific entities, as I was saying, as part of the criteria, is not just a project or an activity, a decarbonization specific measure, but the criteria also cover entities and sustainability linked debt sustainability bonds or loans. Now, what are the criteria that needs to be included? It depends on what is being certified. It can be either the whole entity without a specific debt instrument, so it can be just the entity themselves. And this would require, this can be either a business segment, just a part of the company. It can be either just the producing part of the company, or the transport, the storage, all the different components that can all be certified. And the criteria include the importance of reducing emissions to close to net zero by 2050, as we were saying before, but also meeting the criteria for the specific production facility, which would be the ones that can be used, for example, as I was saying, in the user proceeds bonds, like the green or transition bonds, and then make sure that the operations are, and in particular, will be all dedicated to low carbon hydrogen production. And that is one of the most important things that we want to highlight here, is the fact that with all the confusion that there is with using different colors with hydrogen, from green to pink to blue and gray, and everyone can actually mean slightly different things and slightly different emissions level. With that, we only use the low carbon hydrogen expression and definitions, let's say, which can be qualified if it meets our criteria. It's either low carbon or not, which we hope will give more clarity, in particular to the stakeholders that are in the business. So from investors to actually the hydrogen producers, and then those who are, of course, working in storage, transport, etc. Finishing off with the hydrogen applications, this is going to be the last slide. What I think is interesting here is that what's important is that hydrogen per se, and having green hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen, as we were saying, rather, is not just for the sake of having this low carbon hydrogen, but it's more into what it's going to be used for. And there are, of course, a lot of end-use applications that, and all of these are evolving and will continue evolving. So there will be a need for a structured and aligned development with the net zero. And Climate Bonds, we have done a lot of work on how and which are the best end-use applications for hydrogen, which is why not only do we have specific criteria, but also policy work in recommending what we think is best use of this scarce resource, especially the low carbon one, which will be still for the foreseeable future quite a scarce food resource. So products and using it as feedstock for chemicals or for products, as saying like the production of virgin steel through a DRI, direct reduced iron, in electric arc furnace, and not getting into the details, but the importance of hydrogen for specific sectors that have very little alternatives to decarbonizing, like steel, like fertilizers, will be much more useful than using hydrogen in electricity production or commercial or residential heating, where there are other options to decarbonization. So this is just to reiterate that hydrogen is not just for the sake of low carbon hydrogen, but we need to make sure that being it a very scarce resource is actually used where it makes the highest impact and where it will be used the most to decarbonize, and where there are actually less alternatives, unlike the electrification, which has been working in these sectors as well. Lucia, Elena, I think I can stop here and give the floor back to you. And thanks very much.
Hi, Fabio. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Elena, and sorry to decided to reject me. So, okay. Fabio, thank you very much again. I can see there are lots of questions from the public for you. Okay, so now I will give the word to José Manuel. José Manuel, you can start.
Okay, thank you. Let me share the presentation. Yeah, I see. Let me try again, because I cannot see the window of the PPT. Technical problems today.
Yeah.
Let me see. Where is it? I cannot believe it. I lost it.
If you have any
Here
problem,
it
we can
is.
help you. Okay, don't worry.
Here it is. It was the last window. Strange. It's the first time that this happens to me. Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
Everything right? Okay. So I will deep dive a bit on the rules of the auction and what happened with it of the first pilot auction of the hydrogen bank. And of course, I will tell you what the rules do we like from a company like EDP, that is a renewable utility promoter. And also, I will talk a bit about the possible future of these auctions in the end of my presentation. But of course, if some other connected issues like RFNBO certification or renewable energy directive, if some questions about that appear on if it's appropriate to talk about these things, I will also can comment about that. So I will start with a small introduction. As you may of you are aware, renewable hydrogen today is not bankable. So the cost of production, which is the bar at the left, which is mainly composed by the cost of electricity and the investment in the equipment. This cost is much more than the alternatives that the off-takers of hydrogen or similar products have today. So this difference that we call the funding gap, it is, to my point of view, the main barrier to the deployment of renewable hydrogen projects and for the adoption of this new vector. And significantly, most of the cost comes from the cost of the renewable electricity, and we estimate that in an average project, this can represent more or less 70% of the cost of the so-called levelized cost of hydrogen, LCOH. And so to deal with this problem of the high funding gap, well, it is expected that if we want to adopt renewable hydrogen during this decade, some public intervention has to exist. Otherwise, we will have to wait until the cost of electricity decreases or the cost of the CO2 increases. Perhaps in some point in the middle of next decade, there is the break-even. So the renewable hydrogen perhaps is bankable against the alternatives. But until then, if we want to advance in the learning curve and start reducing these costs, we have to learn how to produce renewable hydrogen in the most optimal way. So the public intervention is needed to make the first projects go ahead. And I can classify these two types of interventions into two big areas, what I call the carrots and the sticks, talking in a very simplistic way. So the carrots or the incentives are mainly two, direct subsidies to CapEx or to OpEx, or other types of regulatory incentives. So for instance, exemptions in levies, or for instance, prioritization of access to the grid to renewable hydrogen projects that can perhaps make things more easy to the promoters of the projects. And regarding the sticks, I will say that perhaps are mainly two. The first one is the environmental charges that we have already the best signal, which is the CO2 price. So with the increase of the CO2 price with the time, the willingness of the off-takers to change into clean production means like renewable hydrogen, this willingness will increase, of course. And the other main stick to the off-takers is creating like quotes or obligations for purchasing the product, in this case, renewable hydrogen. And that is already in place with the Renewable Energy Directive. Perhaps many of you know that by 2030, according to this new legislation that has been recently approved last year, 42% of the hydrogen that is used in industry applications has to be renewable by this 2030, and 1% at least of the energy used in the transport sector has to come from renewable hydrogen or its derivatives, the so-called RFNBOs, the renewable fuels of non-biological origin, which is the legal name that in this European legislation they adopt for talking about renewable hydrogen from electrolytic source and its derivatives like green ammonia or green methanol. And in this webinar, we will focus on the first one of these measures, the direct subsidies. And in this case, it will be a subsidy that is not for CapEx, but it will be a subsidy to the LCOH, to the cost of production as a whole of the hydrogen. And this is, I will perhaps insist later in my presentation, this is a good step in the right direction because so far the mechanisms that exist in Europe are mainly focused on subsidizing the CapEx. And as you can see in the left bar, the CapEx of the electrolysis is not the most significant cost. So to our opinion, until the cost of electricity decreases enough, it will be needed subsidies to OPEX, or in this case, subsidies that combine those the two types of cost, CapEx and OPEX, through the LCOH. So landing more specifically in this mechanism, the Hydrogen Bank, it was created like more than 1 year ago. It was a reaction to the European Commission to the creation in the States of a very strong incentive, a tax credit incentive to clean hydrogen. In this case, through the so-called Inflation Reduction Act that was approved in the States by August 2022. And in September, the European Commission announced that Europe was going to create a similar mechanism called the Hydrogen Bank as a way, to my point of view, to react to the strong incentive to develop projects there in the other side of the ocean in the US. And well, the Commission worked in the rules of this auction during some months, and finally the terms and conditions of the auction were announced by August 2023. And then we knew that we will have a window of several months between November and February to apply for this new fund. So the application has like two components. One is information. That's the reason there is this window open during so many months. We, the promoters that we applied to this mechanism, we had to provide a lot of information to prove that our projects were mature enough to apply. And of course, the second component is the bid. So as I will detail later, the base of the allocation of this grant is on the bid that the promoters present. So the lowest bid will win. The process of allocation is taking a while, so we expect perhaps the announcement of the results like within a month or so. And after that, the winners will know that they have been awarded this grant, but of course they will have some months to prepare the grant agreement. In this case, the maximum time for preparing the grant agreement will be 9 months. So this is something that I also want to highlight, that although this mechanism looks simple, that is an auction based on the bid, in the end, the lead time is high. So it will be more than a year between the time that we apply and the time that we have the grant agreement and we can start developing our projects. That perhaps is not desirable, taking into account that the assumptions that you use to make your numbers and your figures and your business plans can evolve significantly during a year in a sector like this that moves quickly. So it will be desirable that for future actions, this lead time between the application and the resolution will be less. Perhaps I can go through the next slide to go more into detail. So in this pilot auction, only the so-called RFNBO, as I talked before, the renewable hydrogen that meets the qualification criteria of the Renewable Energy Directive is subject to this mechanism, and it will be verified and certified that the production in fact complies with the rules of being called an RFNBO according to the Renewable Energy Directive. So hydrogen that is not compliant with these rules can be produced in the facility. It is allowed by the Commission, but only up to a certain level that I will mention later. The budget of this first pilot auction is 800 million euro, and the bid that a single bidder can do, it's limited to 1/3 of this amount to avoid that a single winner takes all the budget. The support in this case is structured, as I said, into a fixed premium in euro per kilogram produced of hydrogen that complies with the RFNBO criteria. There is no indexation, so the quantity will be fixed during the period of the grant, and the grant will be paid maximum in 10 years period. The auction is like a closed envelope auction, so there are no rounds. You submit your bid, and that's it. If you are awarded, you will get the price of the bid that you submitted. And there are of course rules for to solve ties in case that more than one bidder has the same price. The maximum price that could be offered, it is 4.5 euros per kilogram. That's the maximum premium. And of course, that will be during the maximum 10 years period of disbursement. The bids that are successful will be published, I was meaning. So the rest of the bids would remain confidential, but only aggregate results will be published in order to draw conclusions from this process. The main purpose of the European Commission, perhaps with this auction, is to test the market and to extract the conclusions that perhaps will allow to design better future auctions. So the volume in this case is low, but the results and the aggregate results coming from the bids of the bidders will be used to design future auctions. It is important as well that to prove matureness of the projects that participate in this mechanism, a completion bond will be required. So it is not needed a guarantee to participate at the beginning, but if you are awarded, 4% of the grants have to be delivered to the Commission in a bank warranty. Regarding accumulation of these grants with other mechanisms, it is generally not allowed. You can see here that there are many restrictions for this accumulation, and my opinion is that this was an opportunity that was lost to use this budget, to use this small budget to make sure that projects that already had a grant can complement the previous grants with these mechanisms and make some projects go ahead. Well, let's see what happens in future actions, but in this case, the Commission decided to not allow this accumulation. They wanted a level playing field process to extract conclusions from it and to avoid that countries that have perhaps more budget to allocate to hydrogen projects have an advantage in this auction. The maximum size of the projects that the minimum size of the projects that could participate in this mechanism is 5 megawatts. The COD has to be in 5 years, and there were no limits in the sector or the type of off-taker that could be the final user of this hydrogen. Perhaps this may change in the future auctions, depending on the result, because if the European Commission sees that the same sector or the same country takes most of the grant, perhaps they put some limits in the future to make sure that a more fair division of the grant is done in future auctions. There are some flexibilities in the production of the hydrogen, but I want also to draw your attention that regarding the RFNBO compliance, as I said, it is not required for the 100% of production, but you will have to prove in the end of the period that with all the hydrogen that is produced in the facility that is subsidized, reaches at least a 70% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And that with the current rules, that will mean that the CO2 lifetime emissions rate of the project should not be more than 28 grams per megajoule. That are the rules. That perhaps is more or less equivalent to 3 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen produced. And the qualification criteria to prove the matureness of the project to participate is essentially what is in this list. So you have to prove that you have a renewable sourcing strategy for the electricity that you need, that you have pre-commercial agreements with off-takers, that you have also pre-commercial agreements with manufacturers of equipment, and that you have at least started the process of environmental permits and grid connection permits. So you have to show credible evidence that this has already initiated and that your project is more than just a PPT. In this slide, this is a summary of the things that we see that are positive and negative from this mechanism. As I said, this is a positive mechanism because it allows subsidization of OPEX and CAPEX at the same time. It's a good step in the right direction, but the inconvenience in this case is that the budget is very low, but we expect that perhaps in future auctions this will improve. And regarding possible outcomes of the auction, this is the last slide. Well, this perhaps is a crystal ball exercise from my side. I expect perhaps that large projects with economies of scale, they have more advantage in the results, or perhaps as very small projects with a minimum size of 5 megawatts will be successful as well, because the losses are limited if they bid for a subsidy that is lower perhaps that they need, but at least it is a subsidy that will allow them to go ahead with the project, limiting losses. Although, as I said, there are no limits in the rules of the auction for the sector or the country or the countries that can participate. Perhaps some sectors are the winners of the auction, and I expect perhaps that being the refineries or ammonia manufacturers that have obligations according to the Renewable Energy Directive, as I said, and they have they shouldn't do significant investment to adapt to renewable hydrogen. Also, we cannot expect perhaps the participation of flagship projects that many of us have heard about in the past years, because those projects perhaps are already included in mechanisms like EPCI or innovation funds. And as I said, this mechanism is not compatible with other grants. So new projects perhaps will appear here as the winners. So with the results of this auction, the Commission will learn valuable lessons, and many uncertainties that are from the coming auctions will be solved, and perhaps in future auctions there will be more limits in the product to be auctioned. There will be perhaps local manufacturing requirements, geographic rules, and other structure of the auction different from the fixed premium, and perhaps CFDs appear, or even CFDs, that is carbon contracts for difference. Other structures that perhaps will allow the Commission to test other possibilities for subsidizing the renewable hydrogen. And I think I went a bit beyond the time. I will stop here and leave some time for Q&A, and I pass the floor to Elena. Thanks.
José Manuel, thanks. Okay, if you, in the meantime, you want to have a look at some questions from the public, so I will ask some question to Fabio. Okay, Fabio, let's start with you, sir. Let's see. Let's see. I lost my question. Sorry. It was here from the public. Let's see. Yes, this one. What about the barriers many off-takers see these days to adopt into a project that allow being competitive today using green A2 rather than fossil fuels?
Yes, thank you. I think what's important here to highlight in terms of the barriers for the off-takers is often well, the price. So I think the main barrier that a lot of other than the technological one, I think the price, the financing of the green hydrogen, or the low carbon hydrogen rather, from the end users is probably the highest and the biggest barrier here. This is why the role of policy is crucial. The role of the finance and investor stakeholders here is crucial to making sure that there is actually the business case. The most important thing is making sure that there is the business case, and what is the role that policy can play here. I think the role that policy can play is essential, is crucial, which is why initiatives like the IRA and the subsequent legislation that is now going on in the US is important, and that's why there's been a big push in the European Union as well. So I think that, as José was saying, is in terms of carrot and sticks, the role that policy can play is the most important one. What is interesting here is that the European Hydrogen Bank comes at the right time, when there is some development and there are some pilot projects that have been implemented and that are actually running in the European Union, and especially the steel sector. There is some work that's been done in Northern Europe with H2 steel, with hybrid, that are using low carbon hydrogen, and in particular with renewable electricity from Northern Europe. So I think that these barriers, especially from the finance angle and making the business case, can and should be addressed by policies and initiatives like, in this case, the carrots from the European Union, but there's also a lot of sticks like the emission trading system, or for example, also for hydrogen, the new CBAM, the carbon border adjusted mechanism that has been adopted and has just started in October in its transitional phase. I think the role of policy here is crucial, and I think that the European Union has made a lot of progress, although of course there's always room for improvement. But in terms of barriers, I think that how the business case can be improved is where the role of policymakers is, and is going to be ever always more crucial going forward.
Okay, thanks, Fabio, for the answer. Let's pick up this one for José. Is the frequency and budget level of future auctions rounds already known?
No, what we know so far is that a new, I perhaps cannot say auction, perhaps round of auctions, that is not clear, but a new set of measures from the Hydrogen Bank will be launched by the end of this year, perhaps in the third quarter, using the lessons learned from this first pilot auction. We know that there are at least 2.2 billion of euros, that is American billion of euros, dedicated for this new set of measures or auctions. But let's see. I mean, perhaps the budget will increase in the future, but we have no strong visibility of what is going on next. It will depend pretty much on the availability of funds from the Commission, perhaps on the willingness of member states to use their own funds to participate in this auction in what they call the auction as a service mode. So, for instance, Germany in this first auction is allocating 350 million euros for projects in their territory to complement the funds coming from Europe. So many uncertainties that perhaps will be unveiled during this year. So we have to keep the attention to what's going on.
Okay, Jose, thanks. Another one for you. If the LCOH bid is capped to 4.5 kilos, is that not too low? Current production costs run in the 6-7 kilos.
Yeah,
Nice.
if it was the case, yeah, it will be too low. But perhaps I highlight, perhaps I did not insist much during my presentation that the subsidy is a fixed premium, is not subsidizing the whole LCOH. So it is supposed that you have an agreement or a pre-agreement with an off-taker for participating in the auction, and the off-taker will pay something, the maximum that they are willing to for the hydrogen, and the subsidy will complement what the off-taker is willing to pay. So it will be a premium, an extra for the source of revenues coming from the off-taker to reduce exactly the funding gap.
Thanks. Fabio, one question for you. Which are the policies or projects where low carbon hydrogen application in the most relevant sectors have been implemented so far? An example worth mentioning?
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think what is interesting to highlight here is the use of green and low carbon hydrogen rather in the steel sector. I think this is where a lot of progress has been happening in the last years, and this is where, as for example, Climate Bonds have done a lot of work into making sure that the business case is there. So do reach out and take a look at the website for more info on this from everyone. What I want to highlight here, I think that is there are a lot of pilot projects, not just from the big companies like ArcelorMittal in Europe that are using low carbon hydrogen, but there are also other smaller projects that have tested it, and there are some in Sweden that I mentioned before, like H2 Green Steel and hybrids. And what is interesting there is that, of course, there are the right and the positive conditions of cheaper renewable electricity and the favorable regulation environment, but they've managed to raise over 6 million capital for investment in 100% low carbon steel, which is great to see. And what we need to do is, as this business case has been improved and is actually happening right now in Europe, this what we need from policymakers now is to make sure that this is scaled up and more production comes in line, because a lot of what we're seeing is that the final investment decisions are not being made yet, and there are a lot of plans. So I think that the role that policymakers here are playing and have played, which is why, of course, other than the conditions of cheap renewable electricity in Sweden, there is also favorable environment, and this is what has pushed companies to actually bet on the low carbon hydrogen for steel, which is a crucial sector for decarbonization. Accounts for, depending on the stats, from 8 to 9 even % of global emissions. So it's a crucial one to decarbonize the industrial highest emitter ever. So I think, and that's where the role of hydrogen and low carbon hydrogen will actually improve the business case and make sure that we are on a pathway to net zero.
Fabio, for the answer. Jose, another one for you. What kind of changes do you think could be made for the upcoming second round of auctions? And do you think a local manufacturing requirement would be beneficial? Sorry.
Well, as I said, I don't have the crystal ball. Everybody's talking. Everybody that is a stakeholder to this auction is talking that perhaps it's unfair, that is open to every kind of off-taker, that perhaps different off-takers with different sensibilities, different capabilities for reducing emissions, perhaps they should be in different auctions. This has positive and negative effects. For instance, I, as a promoter of renewable hydrogen projects, I am not oriented to one single type of off-takers. We are in a concept of hydrogen valleys, so we aim to supply different off-takers in the surroundings of our facilities. So dividing the envelope into different sectors, perhaps for us is a barrier to participate. So I mean, perhaps there will be more country limitations to avoid that one country takes everything. Perhaps there will be local equipment requirements. There are derivatives from the Net Zero Industry Act. If that happens, it has to be carefully assessed, because that will imply a restriction in the competition. So in this auction, there were no rules regarding local requirements, but they asked in the information about this. So this is an information that they are getting, the Commission, from the participation of all of us. And they will know if there are enough bids that use local requirement or not, that perhaps can be used as a requirement in future auctions. So, I mean, many uncertainties, as I said, and after the results of this auction are announced, perhaps we will have some more light on this.
Thanks, Jose. Fabio, this is for you. What happens after 10 years? Is the hypothesis that the energy is cheaper or carbon tax is higher, given the low visibility there? How does it impact a business model?
Yeah, this is exactly one of the assumptions is exactly that. Actually, both that the energy is going to be cheaper, assuming that, of course, the market will have scaled up, not just for hydrogen, but all electricity, renewable electricity will be even cheaper, so that then this can be included in the business case. But also the fact that there is another incentive from the carbon tax from the European ETS, the emission trading system. So that's exactly the assumption. So that in the first year, there's the actual public money and policymakers who are coming in to help build the business case. And then once the market has scaled up, and we have seen this happen in other sectors, so of course, starting with the electricity subsidies, with the renewable electricity for solar PV, for wind, that are even still ongoing, and in some cases is actually what helped get renewable electricity cheaper in I think 3/4 of the world around, more or less right now. And this is exactly the same hypothesis, the same assumption under such schemes like the at the European level for the adjoint bank. If I would just add one thing to the previous question that Jose answered, I think to build on that, one interesting point is that also other than the local requirements, what's interesting is that here it's not been included under the EU adjoint bank rules. What is interesting here is that it actually helps counterbalance the state aid rules that have recently been relaxed, allowing member states that have higher capacity and basically more money to subsidize their capacity, their industries. So a European scheme like the EU Adoption Bank actually helps to make sure that there's a more even distribution and that the market, the single market at the European level is actually more competitive and helps balance the higher capacity that some states like Germany and France have compared to others that have more limited capabilities to actually support and subsidize the industry. So it's I think on that front, other than the local requirement, I think even just within the European Union, having a European-wide scheme is actually helpful in that sense.
Thanks, Fabio. Last question for Jose here. Are there any restriction for the auction if suppliers or key elements come from out of the US?
Yeah, well, no, not in this moment. So it was open to all type of equipment. The production has to be in Europe, in the European Economic Area. That will include perhaps Norway, if I'm not mistaken. But the equipment come from other regions and other parts of the world.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Jose, for your time and for joining us today. Before closing this webinar, I just remind the public, again, the materials will be sent in a few days. And then we will encourage you to come to our event in June in Rome, the 11th and the 12th, where topics like this will be covered more deeply. So again, thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.